Colin, tell me, how did a bad date launch your biggest business success?
So when I was about 25 years old, I went on this disaster of a date that changed the entire trajectory of my life. It was so
Was that
bad, so
bad?
comical. Yeah. And so in hindsight, I realized what happened on that bad date and a few others was I started to grow this really deep sense that this industry, the dating industry, was broken and this problem was far from solved. And so it really drove my curiosity about why we meet the certain people we meet. Is it exposure through our friends, our family, workplace? Is it going on dating sites, etc.? What gets us attracted to them? So the psychology at play in attraction, in finding people who are the right vibes, even if they're friends, but mostly for dating, and then how to turn that into a successful business. And when this bad date happened, and I was feeling pretty much, dejected after a series of just dates that didn't go super well, none as bad as this, but didn't go super well. I finally had the fire, the entrepreneurial fire in me to solve a problem that I was completely unaware of any of the other elements in the industry. I didn't have a training in any of that stuff. I wasn't a relationship coach. I didn't have a big network. I wasn't an influencer like we've seen a lot of dating apps start lately. And I dove into something unknown, and that's what drove me to it. So fast forward, I dove into that dating industry and I ended up joining some accelerators, one of which was in Silicon Valley. And during that accelerator, I had another very just honest moment with myself and with the people around me where I admitted that I thought my dating startup was just flat out going to fail. I thought there's no way it's going to work. It's not going to take off. We're not going to get investment at demo day, at the end of the accelerator. And that honest conversation and reflection resulted in the pivot that created this monster of a dating app that did take off, that did finally get some traction with users and then investors. So that was the journey. That was the impetus for getting into a successful startup and getting that to 1 million users within about 3 months. And that was the beginning of my career and this whole trajectory of being super curious about the psychology behind our consumers, our user base, and how to grow them. And then, of course, the psychology as an entrepreneur as well.
So you've now written a book about user growth and user psychology. And from what I'm seeing from the story, apart from being exceptionally amusing, is that you were creating this startup based on your user experience and thinking, okay, if I've had these experiences as somebody, as somebody who wants to have good dates, like that's the outcome I want. But instead of that outcome, I'm using these products and getting these other outcomes, which are not what I want. Okay. So I'm creating this as a user as opposed to as an engineer or as a product manager or basically just somebody
hmm
who's looking at it purely from a commercial lens. And so I'm curious, you mentioned that there was a pivot after you realized that things are not going to work as they are. We need to change something. What was that change and why did it work?
Great question, and it's another scandalous one.
Oh, great.
Yes,
Bring it on.
the original idea for my dating site was basically I thought the best way to meet people was meeting a friend of a friend. So you have that person in common and they can help give you some vetting information. They can make sure it's safer. You're more likely to behave if you know somebody in common. So all these theories that I think still some of them hold valid. But what I was struggling with was getting users to pay attention because that sounds, it sounds plausible, but it's not exactly something that makes people jump to sign up. And so the twist, the pivot that we came up with was, and you got to remember this was back in 2012, early 2013. So this was the heyday of everybody, it felt like, was on Facebook, and Facebook had their platform where you could connect to it and utilize that network, your own friend network. And so what we came up with was, well, I have this 2,000 friends on Facebook. What if I could figure out which of my friends secretly had a crush on me and wanted to hook up with me? And that was the twist. It was going from friends of friends to very much casual and very much covering the secrets within your own friend network. So we came up with a very scandalous name. It was Bang with Friends, and everything about the branding matched that sort of angle, from the logos to the icon and the language we used in the app, the copy and all that stuff. So it was very much this pivot into let's get this thing noticed. Let's play directly to a deep, curiosity and desire that a lot of people have. And it was of the moment because, as I said, that was when Facebook apps were taking off.
And so you reached 1 million people within 3 months. And how did that happen?
Yeah, I think it took us about 3 months, and it was crazy because what we did to seed it was I had two co-founders who, we built it in basically a night and a lot of Red Bull and vodka and just creating this thing. And we just started sending it to our friends in the office, the accelerator office, our friend networks. But we were anonymous. So we were sending it as, oh my gosh, look at this thing we found, or look at this thing somebody sent me. They didn't know we created it. That was the initial seeding of it. And it was such a curious, provocative idea that it really got spread by word of mouth initially. And once that started happening, then we started sending it to a few journalists. And one of them happened to take the bait, so to speak, and ran with a very short blog article on their website. Not even, I would say, like a real news outlet, but just one of these kind of like, men's journals sort of blogs. And that one really exploded it outside of our immediate networks, and the word of mouth thing. So now we had two different fuels on the fire. Came from there was massive amounts of press attention and massive amounts of users sharing the site to each other. And we hadn't even built in yet a referral system. So it was them just saying, hey, check out Bang with Friends. You got it. Here's the link. But we didn't build in any way to properly incentivize them or track up the referrals.
So before I ask any more proper business and tech questions, I'm actually curious, was this more popular with men or with women, or was it kind of equal?
Definitely more popular with men, as
I
you'd
thought
suspect.
so. I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. But I will say, we had a number of matches happen very quickly. There was one of the guys in the startup accelerator. He was probably user number 5 or something, if I remember right. And he got a match the very first weekend with somebody that he sent it to. So,
And
and
did
they went on a
good things happen?
great things happened. He even shared a photo of them together, and him were smiling, and both said thanks. So it was fun for them. I think they went to college together, had graduated like 2 or 3 years earlier, and yeah, hadn't reconnected since then. But this kind of brought them back together.
Awesome. Wow. Connecting people. So I'm wondering, because I think when people are listening to this, it sounds like, yeah, this is really fun. And like, frankly, if I would have got it, I would have wanted to see it. Like the curiosity
Hmm.
factor is a huge driver. But for somebody who is building, let's say, some software for accountants, they're thinking, well, okay, this is a really fun, interesting interview, but completely irrelevant to what I'm doing. So
Hmm.
are there any lessons for founders who are building things that are basically useful, but frankly much more boring than banging with friends?
Absolutely. So it took me almost 20 years of my career to figure out the common thread between all of the successes I've had and frankly the failures was this understanding and actually getting into the mindset of your consumers. So yeah, if you are building software for accountants, you really need to understand who they are, not what their hookup needs are or their dating needs, but who they are in that moment when you're trying to get them to try out your product, or if they're already using it, what part of the journey they are in so that you can optimize for that. So I've built a number of businesses and helped a number of different companies to grow at different stages, one of which was a live streaming video app. And that one, very much not my audience. In fact, before I joined that company, I didn't ever watch live streaming video. But these are content creators or influencers who, they are on video for 2 to 4 hours in a row, which is exhausting. And oftentimes they're 20 to 28-year-old women who are good looking, lots of makeup, chronically online because they're growing their audience and they're interacting with their fans and all that stuff. That was the furthest thing from who I was. So I didn't even have Instagram at the time. So I had to get into their mindset as well to recruit those content creators and make the experience very, very valuable for them and easier for them. At the same time, understanding the viewer's mindset of this new interactive media, which is very different than consuming a YouTube video or any other passive media. So that was a good challenge for me and a different type of business where I had to adapt to the mindset and put myself into their shoes and really understand where they're coming from and what they're feeling in the moment. This stuff is so valuable, whether it is your own problem or it's a problem that you're solving for somebody else, because the key muscle you're building is this empathy muscle for your customers.
I remember when I was working in my first company and we had hired a user experience designer, and our product was aimed at women, and the user experience designer was a man. And I remember thinking, is he going to really, like, is this really going to work? Because
Mm,
you need this intuitive understanding. And essentially, our product, the consumer side, women would take photos of outfits that they were thinking of buying or thinking of wearing, and they would get
hmm
feedback from other women and from professional stylists. So essentially, it was quite a kind of sensitive thing. And there's something that basically girls do all the time, send each other photos and say, look, I'm going
hmm
on this date, should I wear this? And I remember wondering, like, is a man going to fundamentally be able to understand this thing that we understand, a lot of women really understand and do intuitively?
hmm
And it ended up working, but I think it's because he wasn't just, effeminate. It's because he basically just really made an effort. And I think also it's because he spoke to his wife a lot. I think his
Yes.
wife was the brains behind a lot of our designs, because he would test ideas on her first, because he was
Yeah.
so aware that he was definitely not the target user. And so what would be your advice to somebody who wants to do a good job, but they're not exactly the target user? So how do they get into the psychology of the person that they're building for?
Yeah, that's really challenging. And with the live streaming app, I had a team of women on our marketing team and on our recruitment team for the content creators who I definitely give a lot of credit to and I leaned on to understand these insights. So a big part of that, a big part of my work is trying to identify how do I get into the user shoes, even if it is channeling one of our team members and empowering them to be that representative to really understand what they're going through as a user. I talk about a few different methods in my book, and I think it really is a pick and choose sort of thing. You can do what feels most natural and easiest for you. So the first one, if you know a bit about acting, there's a technique called the method acting technique. Yeah. So a lot of big actors use this, and they basically live the life of their character. And so, if you can do this, if you can go through the same sort of problems and situations that your customers will have, that is a super effective way. And of course, it takes a lot of investment of your time, of your energy, of shifting your mindset and fighting your typical default decisions and default paths that you would go through. But it's really valuable. And I did that for the live streaming app where I became a live streamer. I went on camera at least once a week for 3 hours in a row. And I figured out, how do you come up with content for 3 hours in a row and have people engaged and not have everybody leave and have them interacting with you and have them sending you these virtual gifts. So I was trying to live the life of a streamer for a bit. It says I lost internet. Hopefully it's still okay.
I can still hear you and speak
Okay,
to you,
cool.
so yeah,
I'll just keep
let's
going.
continue. Yeah.
So that was the first thing. And what I figured out is every streamer needs to figure out what are they best at? What do they enjoy doing? Because you can't do that much content without enjoying it. And so for me, I love singing and I love karaoke. So I ended up doing karaoke for half the time. And that kept the hours rolling by and gave me an insight into, all right, this is what it's like to use the app as a content creator. And this is what it's like to keep people entertained. So the first one, I would say the method mindset technique and trying to actually live the problems and the situations of your customer. Now, you don't always have to do that. So there are a bunch of other ways we can understand our users. Another one, if you've heard of personas, personas are basically, just briefly, it's building this character that can stand in for your typical customer and understanding all of the demographics about them. So their age, their income, their job, their family situation, all that stuff. And
So it's becoming like a real person as opposed to saying male 20 to 30 who of this income bracket is basically saying, and actually I did an episode on this which was
mhm,
inspired by Ferrero Rocher and Kinder
mm,
Eggs. So the guy who
yum.
founded it, he created the creator of Nutella, who's basically I think should be made a saint, and he became a billionaire, and one of
hmm
the people who really deserved to be a billionaire because he brought us so much happiness. He had this image of Mrs. Valeria, and that was the customer. So it was the
hmm
Italian mother who wants to buy healthy healthy-ish and affordable treats for
hmm
her kids. And it was like, would Mrs. Valeria buy this? And he was very specific about who she was, as opposed to saying, Italian mothers with three kids of this age and this income bracket. Is this what you mean?
Yes, exactly. So Mrs. Valeri would be Nutella's persona that they were thinking about, and they use it. You can use it as a stand-in in all of your conversations and decisions about your product, about your marketing, thinking about how Miss Valeri would react to this, right? I take it a step further in that not only do we know her name and a lot of the stuff about her, but I ask 10 more deeply psychological questions that will determine how she is interfacing and thinking about your product in this area. So I asked things like, where does she use your product? Is it, in that case, it would be she's in a rush in the afternoons to get a snack for her kids, and she's in the kitchen and she has three kids running around and just grabs it from the cabinet, throws it on some bread, and hands it to her kids, right? So that's the sort of deeper psychological questions I want to understand because then we can understand what she's feeling in that moment. She's feeling rushed, stressed, and that's going to inform things like the design of the jar and how hard it is to unscrew with one hand versus two. And so we do that for all of our products, even our digital products. For a lot of apps, for instance, I talk to my team and I talk to other founders and I tell them, think about where they're going to use this. Is it like a long-term, long usage app? They're going to be in it for 20, 30 minutes at a time, just sitting on their couch or in bed, or are they on their commute? Are they in the bathroom, which we have to admit happens a lot, right? And it's like a 5-minute check-in here, and then they go to another app. So understanding this really helps us to hone in on what is the persona that we actually care about and what are they going through in that moment, all the emotions, all of the things that are going to impact their decision environment that is going to drive their behavior.
And so you mentioned that there were three things. So there was the become the person. That was number one. Number two was figure out the persona and where that persona uses the product. And so what's number three?
hmm
We're dying to know.
Number three would be extensive user research, user interviews, and all of the stuff that I think a lot of people have heard. I give a bit more ideas of how to conduct these in the book. And so there are various things, whether you're a B2B business or you're B2C, and a lot of these, it's basically you incentivize your customers. You segment them by, these are let's say the ones that are already loyal to us. So let's do a focus group and come and incentivize them to show up and then get some really good conversation and dialogue going so that they are just sharing their free flow thoughts with us and we're understanding what they're going through as a customer that's already there, that is already qualified. Or, we can take another segment, customers that fell off and didn't become loyal users and incentivize them in a different way. So those are the deep dive, super, some teams have entire user research teams. As a, scrappy founder, I typically do it myself because I really like seeing how people talk about the product or maybe even use the product and their emotions in the moment. And I can internalize that stuff a bit easier when I go through the user interviews, and then of course the quantitative stuff like surveys and all that.
Actually take people through the user testing process in our programs. And what I found
Hmm.
we often have to say to people is that you have to be an anthropologist, not a salesperson. So you
Yeah.
have to watch people in their natural habitat behaving as they
Hmm.
naturally do and suppress your founder instinct to basically tell them why it's amazing. Because
Hmm.
if they think it's crap, you really need to hear that.
Hmm.
And so my final question is, what's your advice? How do you get really keen founders to be an anthropologist as opposed to a salesperson? Because I find that that's often so hard. You know, when you're getting feedback, especially if it's your first ever product and you're going through this for the first time, it's really difficult to sit back and just learn from what people are doing.
I wish I had this one trick to share that got people in that mindset. What I found the most useful for myself and for my team, so our marketing team, for instance, I tell them, think about all the masks we put on, all the walls we put up in our brains about the product we live and breathe every day. Think about how much we want to advocate for it, especially as a founder. And we only want to talk about the good sides and we want to grow it as a salesperson, right? Now think about how liberating it would be just to critique it for a while, just to flip that and say, yeah, this part is shit or this part is bad, just to like really open up and be critic about your own product. That is so liberating. And so when you do that, and I would even do that before you go into these user interviews, you can start to shift your mindset into, okay, now I'm open to critiques. In fact, I want to find more. I want to hear more from those users. And it opens up maybe this pathway where now you are welcoming. In fact, I find myself pushing in the user interviews for like, you went by that too fast. Tell me your real thoughts about this. How do what do you feel about this color scheme, this logo? Isn't it a bit drab? Or, you know, you just try to get people to really feel comfortable giving you that critical feedback or at least the raw thoughts. Because when you do, it opens up an entire new perspective. And that's what you're going for as a founder. So it detaches you a bit from that very, hopeful, positive, optimistic founder to, okay, now I want to see through their eyes. I want to really get the real stuff. And so you've become more vulnerable and more open to that vulnerability by already wearing that critic's hat beforehand.
Colin, thank you so much for a really, really interesting conversation. And audience, I think this was really fun. I certainly enjoyed it. So if you want to hear more from Colin, and I certainly do, where can people find you?
Thank you, Sophia. You can find me at my website, so colinhodge.com. That's only with one L. And when you go there, I want you to get the free sample of the book. I want you to definitely, if you buy the book, you can get free gifts. And this stuff is going to help you transform your company. I'd love to hear back from anybody who reads it. Give me your feedback, give me the ideas it sparked for you, and we can definitely talk further. So, colinhodge.com, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.